The odd tang punched the air like an unseen slap the second Jenna slid the plate toward me. She'd made my favorite, roasted chicken drenched in a creamy mushroom pan sauce, buttered rice on the side, thyme sprigs for show. But the aroma wasn't right. Beneath the garlic and browned mushrooms was a faint, sweet chemical note that didn't belong anywhere near a skillet. I felt my face tighten even as I forced a smile back. "For you, Mom," Jenna said, voice sugar-coated and hollow at the same time. Evan, my son-in-law, sat at the far end of my reclaimed wood table, thumbs flicking across his phone like always. If a hurricane barreled through my kitchen, Evan would miss it until the Wi-Fi cut out. I'm 61 years old, and I've learned to trust my nose and my gut. Without drawing attention, I swapped plates with Evan like a magician palming a coin. He didn't notice. He rarely noticed anything that didn't glow. An hour later, his forehead hit the table with a dull thud. Jenna's scream ricocheted off the shiplap walls. "Evan! Evan! Wake up!" While she shook him, I stared at the 2 dinner plates, the sauce congealing in pale swirls at the rim. The man who'd eaten the portion meant for me was slate-colored around the mouth, and my daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd raised by myself after I was widowed, wasn't wide-eyed with shock. She was frantic, yes, but it was the practiced panic of someone who already understood exactly what had happened. The ambulance took 20 minutes to reach my cottage on James Island, just across the marsh from downtown Charleston, South Carolina. When the EMTs carried Evan out, Jenna followed, mascara running, looking every inch the devastated wife. I stayed behind, alone in my kitchen, my world cleaving into a before and an after. My daughter had tried to poison me, and it had begun 72 hours earlier, when I told her no. 3 days before the dinner, Jenna breezed in with a glossy binder, charts, bar graphs, projections, the works. Her boutique, Magnolia Tide, a sunny little shop near King Street, was ready to scale, she said. 2 more locations, a web push, influencers. "Mom, it's practically risk-free. I can double your money in 24 months. She wore the same sales smile she'd had since she was a Girl Scout selling Thin Mints on the church steps. But her eyes wouldn't sit still. They flashed toward Evan on the sofa, then back to the binder, then down to the gold ring she kept spinning around her finger. 15 years ago, after my husband died, I built a home linens company called Low Country Looms from my garage. Bolts of cotton, coastal patterns, washable slipcovers that didn't look like tarps. I know supply chains and seasonal cash flow like I know my own hands. I know when numbers are puffed up with wishes. And Jenna's projections? Too perfect, too glossy, the kind of straight-up graph lines you only see in fairy tales and pitch decks. I closed the binder gently. "Business isn't a feelings game, sweetheart. These numbers don't convince me. I need time to look deeper." The smile on her face slid off like fog in sun. "Time? I've been prepping this for months. You don't trust me." Evan sat up with that careful, measured posture that passes for respect. "Miss Margaret," he said. He's always preferred the formal when he wants something. "Jenna's worked really hard. Maybe you could front a portion? A show of family support?" There was a press in his tone that didn't belong in my living room. It was the first time he'd contradicted me in my own home. That night, after they left, I sat with the binder and a pot of black coffee until midnight, flipping pages, circling odd numbers, writing myself questions. Something felt off. Why did my fiercely independent daughter suddenly need me this badly? Why was Evan steering so much of the conversation about her business? The next morning, I called Victor, my accountant and investment manager for a decade. He's steady, discreet, and allergic to drama. "Vic," I said, "quietly run Jenna's boutique. Leans, payables, cash position, and anything you can surface on Evan's side. "You'll have it in 48 hours, he said. "And Margaret, if your gut is pinging, there's a reason." By then, the visits began. Jenna and Evan popped by every day, which was new. He kept taking phone calls on my back porch and hanging up the second I slid the door open. She picked at her cuticles until they bled. The air in my cottage felt like stretched wire. On the evening before the poison dinner, Victor called. His voice was a kind teacher breaking a hard truth. "Margaret, I'm sorry. Magnolia Tide is upside down. Past due invoices, vendors waiting, rent behind. I'm seeing over $300,000 in debt. And Evan, he's carrying gambling markers, and not the kind you owe to friendly neighborhood bookies. These are people who use broken kneecaps as punctuation." The line hummed. My throat went dry. The ask had never been about growth. It was about survival. Back to the kitchen. Back to Evan's purple mouth and Jenna's perfectly timed scream. Back to the moment my heart restitched itself into armor. If I'd eaten that plate, I would have been the one on a stretcher. Jenna came home from the hospital 3 hours later. Her hair was a storm cloud, her eyeliner a tragic smear. "He's stable," she said, voice wobbling. "They think it's some kind of plant toxin, like oleander. They want to know exactly what you cooked." I held her gaze. "I didn't cook, Jenna. You did. You said you wanted to treat me." Her face blanched. "Yes, but I used your recipe. Your ingredients." "Then why?" I asked softly. "Did you notice me switch the plates? Why were you watching?" She looked down at her phone, tapping nothing. "I don't know what you're implying. You're upset. You should sleep." Sleep. In the house where my child had set a place for my corpse. That night, silence wasn't quiet. It was loud. Every floor creak was a shout. For 30 years, this cottage had been a safe harbor through hurricanes and grief. For the first time, I felt like a trespasser in my own home. I walked the hallway, passing the family photos, Jenna with a gap-toothed grin and sand-crusted knees on Folly Beach, Jenna at the College of Charleston commencement, her mortarboard crooked, Jenna on her courthouse wedding day. She and Evan married spontaneously, she'd said, for us. The truth is, she dreamed of a church wedding with every cousin and a string quartet. Evan had talked her into quick and quiet, and I'd swallowed my misgivings because mothers tell themselves love is compromise. But after Evan, shifts crept in. She canceled dinners. She spoke in pitches and launches instead of confession and laughter. Her texts became transactional. 6 months ago, over tomato soup in my kitchen, she had asked, "Do you ever feel like someone else is making the decisions in your life?" I'd said what mothers say, that it's a season, that stress passes. I hear that question differently now. By dawn, resolve had replaced shock. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't wait for the next dinner invitation that would be my last. When Jenna knocked at 8 a.m., eyes purpled by a sleepless night, she went straight to the point. "The doctors say it's a toxic plant," she said. "Do you have anything dangerous in your garden?" "I keep basil, mint, rosemary, and zinnias. My herbs are as benign as a hymn." "No," I said, voice flat. She sagged onto my sofa. "It's almost like someone put something in the food. On purpose." Her words were a fishing line cast into dark water. "Enough," I said, and even I was surprised by the steel in my tone. "I know what you did." Her chin jerked up. "What are you talking about?" "You asked me for $200,000. I said no. Victor dug into your accounts. Magnolia Tide is drowning. Evan is in with people who don't write receipts. You needed money you couldn't get from a bank, so you tried to take the shortcut." I watched the blood drain from her face. "You put something in my food." She laughed, the worst kind, thin and brittle. Mom, that's insane. I love you. How could you even look me in the eye, I said, and say you didn't? She tried, but her gaze skittered off mine and landed on the floorboards. Her hands were shaking. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper shredded by panic. We're in danger, she said. You don't understand. They told Evan, if we don't pay. She swallowed. I never wanted to hurt you. Evan said it would be quick. My knees went hollow. What was it? She pressed her fingers to her temples. Oleander leaves, dried and ground. He said it would look like a heart attack. My breath came out like a sound you make when a wave knocks you under. And then what? I asked, my voice calm and foreign to my own ears. After I died of a heart attack? We would inherit, she said, not meeting my eyes. The house, the company proceeds, the investments. We could pay everything back and leave Charleston, start clean. You are 37 years old, I said. You are not a leaf in the wind. You are not a girl being told to sneak out after curfew. You stood in my kitchen, ground poison, and served it to me with rice. Tears streaked her face. If you call the police, we're dead. Those men, Mom, please, lend me the money now and we'll disappear. You won't have to see us again. Lend you money, I repeated, almost curious at the audacity. After you tried to end my life like it was a problematic line item? I'm your daughter, she said, voice vaulting into that upper register that always used to bend me. I'm all you have. If you do this, you'll be alone. You ended us, I said, and my voice startled both of us. Not when you asked for money, not when you married in secret. You ended us when you stirred poison into my dinner. I opened the front door. Mom, think, she pleaded, hovering on the threshold. Once you do this, there's no coming back. You lose me forever. I already lost you, I said, and closed the door on the girl I had once carried on my hip. I stood there, palm on painted wood, legs trembling. Then I grabbed my keys and walked straight to Lila's house. Lila across the street, my neighbor for 15 years, my porch swing confidant with a laugh like a belle in a robe in colors only Charleston widows can pull off. She opened on the first knock, hair in curlers, eyes switching from sleepy to sharp. Margaret, honey, you're shaking. Get in here. I told her everything while she brewed chamomile tea, how Jenna asked for money, how my number sense said no, how Evan kept drifting to the porch for calls, how the dinner smelled off, how I flipped the plates, how Evan dropped, how Jenna confessed to Oleander. Words poured faster than the kettle. Lila's honey-brown eyes turned hard. This isn't melodrama. This is attempted murder. If she did it once, she'll try again. You aren't staying alone in that house. She's my child, I said, the sentence both shield and chain. How do I put my daughter in a cell? A mother's love is not a suicide pact, Lila said, sliding the mug into my hands. You didn't put her anywhere. She put herself there. I slept, if you can call it that, on Lila's sofa, and at daybreak she had a plan as crisp as a courtroom agenda. We go back together. You pack a bag. Then we call a lawyer, and we call the police. Police? I whispered, as if the word itself might shatter the pains. Margaret, she wrote a recipe for your death. If you had died last night, she would be planning your funeral brunch. At 10, we crossed to my cottage. The air inside felt heavy, like the house itself knew grief. Lila went straight to the kitchen and froze. Come here, she said, voice low and urgent. She was holding a small glass spice jar with a handwritten label. I knew the handwriting as surely as I knew my own, looping, neat, the way Jenna used to write, I love you, on sticky notes and hide them in my purse. The label, Oleander, ground. Lila held it with a dish towel like it might bite. "Behind the cinnamon," she said. "Your daughter left a smoking gun in your spice rack." My stomach flipped. Seeing proof pulled the whole nightmare into color. Lila found latex gloves in the trash, a dishcloth with green smears, a mortar with a chalky ring. She photographed everything with a steadiness I didn't have. "Evidence first," she said. "If Jenna realizes she left breadcrumbs, she'll come sweep them." We climbed to the guest room Jenna always used, still dressed in the pale coral she picked at 12. Lila opened the desk drawer and slid out a folded paper. "It's a list," she said, unfolding it. In Jenna's tidy script: oleander, fresh leaves, gloves, mortar, pestle, crush fine opportunity, special dinner. Call ambulance 30 minutes after I sat on the edge of the bed, the world tilting. She made a to-do list for my death. "There's more," Lila said, scanning the margin. "Check if change needed. Approximate net after probate, 2.8 Mellers. Evan's debt, 500K. Enough to start over." She looked up, sick anger in her face. "They did math on your life." I opened the closet and pulled a battered manila envelope from behind a stack of shoeboxes. Inside were copies of my old will, bank statements, a printout of my brokerage holdings, with hand-scratched timelines for liquidation after event. There was also a letter addressed to me, dated 3 weeks ago. My hand shook as I passed it to Lila. She read in a low, careful voice, "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Please know I never wanted to hurt you, but we have no choice. The oleander will look natural. No one will suspect. We'll be able to settle everything and leave the country, Costa Rica or Panama." She stopped and looked at me. "It goes on. Disposal steps, phrases to say at the funeral, even a split of funds after paying the markers." I pressed my fingers to my lips, fighting the urge to scream. The girl who once wrote me thank you notes for PB&J had drafted a eulogy for my staged heart attack. Lila slid the letter back into the envelope with reverence, as if it were a fragile relic of a faith we no longer shared. "We're past the point of conversation. We call someone who knows what to do." I nodded. "A lawyer first," I said, "then the police." Within 2 hours, Ms. Claire Caldwell, criminal defense and victims' rights, steel-spined and kind-eyed, sat in my living room, a legal pad balanced on her knee. I told the story again from the binder to the ambulance, repeating details until they felt like lines in a deposition. Claire's pen never stopped. "This is textbook attempted murder," she said finally. "Premeditation, procurement of toxic substance, delivery mechanism, and a confession. We preserve the scene and notify law enforcement. We also petition for an emergency protective order today." "I don't want my daughter in handcuffs," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Claire held my gaze. "You didn't put her in handcuffs. She built them herself." The detectives arrived within the hour. Detective Ana Ramirez, who carried authority like a second skin, and Detective Mark Cole, whose quiet questions left no corner unexamined. They photographed, bagged, labeled. They asked me to tell it one more time, then one more after that, each pass etching the truth deeper into something official. "Ms. Shaw," Detective Ramirez said when they finished. "The name I've carried since I was 19 and fell in love with a good man who didn't live long enough. This is one of the cleanest, pre-homicide evidentiary trails I've seen. I'm sorry for what it is, but grateful for how well you preserved it." "What happens to Jenna?" I asked, each syllable tearing something inside me. "We'll pick her up tonight," Ramirez said. "Evan is still at the hospital. We'll place him under watch and interview when medically cleared. I want you at a safe location. Do not go home with Jenna under any circumstances." "I won't," I said. "I'm staying with Lila." Claire called the courthouse from my kitchen island and filed for a no-contact order, while the detectives cataloged the mortar and pestle like museum pieces. By sunset, the cottage felt less like my nest and more like a captioned scene in a true crime documentary. At dawn the next day, my phone buzzed on Lila's kitchen table between two mismatched coffee mugs. Detective Ramirez. "We have your daughter in custody," she said. She denied everything on scene, then started to crumble at the station. "Also, Ms. Shaw. We executed a search at her apartment. We found a notebook with alternate plans if the poison failed." I closed my eyes. I hadn't thought there was any shock left to deliver, but there it was, fresh and raw. "Alternate plans," I managed. "Some I won't describe over the phone," she said gently, "but it confirms this was not an impulsive act." I hung up and stared at Lila's floral oilcloth. The room swam for a beat and then steadied. "I'm going to the arraignment," I said. "You don't have to," Lila said, hand over mine. "I do," I said. "I've spent 37 years buffering Jenna from consequences. If there's a road back to myself, it goes through the truth." 2 hours before court, Claire met us by the front steps and walked us through what would happen. The orange jumpsuit, the charges read aloud: attempted murder, conspiracy, possession of a toxic substance with intent, the bail argument, the prosecutor's exhibits. The words felt like nails hammered into a coffin I hadn't ordered and couldn't return. Inside, the courtroom was cold enough to store meat. When they led Jenna in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was unbrushed, her cheeks swollen, the bright girl gone dim behind a flat stare. She saw me and her look sharpened into a blade. "Mom," she hissed as she passed. There was no plea in it, only accusation, as if I'd committed the offense of not dying quietly. Judge Whitaker, white hair, steady eyes, took the bench. "The state of South Carolina versus Jenna Collins," the clerk said. The prosecutor stood. He laid out the jar labeled in her handwriting, the gloves, the dishcloth, the list, the letter. He spoke in calm, exact sentences about dosage and symptoms and intent. He described me as the intended victim and my cottage as the scene. When he said filial betrayal, something inside me snapped and fused back together in a shape I didn't know I could live in. "How do you plead?" the judge asked. Jenna's public defender leaned into her ear. Her response was barely audible. "Not guilty." The prosecutor argued against bail, premeditation, flight risk, danger to the community. The public defender countered with the usual: no record, marital obligations, stressors. Listening to strangers stack my life into factors in case law felt surreal. The judge weighed it all, then shook his head. "Bail denied," he said. "Remand to custody." The gavel cracked like thunder. Jenna broke, but not into remorse, into rage. "Mom," she cried as deputies took her arm, "you're doing this to me." I didn't stand. I didn't speak. I just sat very still, as if movement might shift the tectonic plate under my feet. Lila's hand found mine and squeezed. Outside on the courthouse steps, Claire exhaled. "Now," she said, "we settle in. This will be measured in months, not days." I nodded. "I'm ready," I said, surprised to realize I meant it. For the first time, I am. The calendar turned into a legal metronome. Motions, hearings, discovery deadlines, clicking off days while life rearranged itself around court dates and statements. Claire, the lawyer who'd shown up in my living room with a yellow legal pad and a backbone, kept my mind organized when my heart tried to run down every hallway at once. 2 tracks, she said, drawing a simple diagram on a notepad at Lila's kitchen table. Criminal case, the state versus Jenna. Safety case, you versus anyone who tries to get within a mile of you. We control the second, We respond to the first. I stayed with Lila those first weeks, sleeping on her guest bed with the pineapple print quilt and waking to the sound of her kettle. We built rituals because rituals hold you together. Morning coffee on the porch, an afternoon walk under the live oaks hung with Spanish moss, evening phone calls from Claire to translate the day's developments into words I could live with. Detectives Ramirez and Cole worked with a focus that almost felt like kindness. They revisited my cottage, mapped out times, confirmed chain of custody on the spice jar, and found security footage from a garden center on Savannah Highway, showing Jenna in oversized sunglasses buying ornamental plants, including an oleander shrub that never made it to my yard. When Ramirez told me that, she added quietly, "You did everything right. You listened to your intuition." I learned more phrases than I ever wanted to know. Toxicology panel, mens rea, constructive possession. I learned how to sit in small interview rooms with a box of tissues and a bottle of water and answer the same questions a dozen different ways while keeping the answers exactly the same. I learned how to look at a photograph of my own kitchen labeled evidence and not lose my breath. Jenna tried to reach me almost immediately. The jail allows collect calls if the recipient accepts. I never did. She wrote letters that arrived in Lila's mailbox, thick envelopes with my name curved in that familiar looping hand. Lila stacked them in a blue shoebox in the pantry for a week, and then, at my request, we fed them to her fireplace one by one. Fire eats paper with a cheerful crackle that feels indecent when it's consuming your past. Lila handed me the brass poker. "Curious?" she asked the first time, eyes searching mine. "I already know what they say," I answered. All of Jenna's apologies are designed to move me where she needs me. She's never been sorry for what she did, only sorry to be caught. It was a hard sentence to say. It was a true one. The state moved quickly. The evidence was clean. The motive was concrete. The intended victim was alive to testify. Claire filed for a no-contact order that the court granted the same afternoon, a fat packet of paper that said in legalese what my front door had said with a click: "Do not come near me again." She also got an emergency protective order that covered Lila's house and my cottage. Lila insisted on adding a ring of practical protections: new cameras, new locks, a motion-activated pour of floodlight on both yards that turned night into noon. "Peace of mind is a kind of oxygen," she said, fiddling with the app on her phone. "Breathe." One morning, 3 weeks after the arraignment, Claire called with that careful tone I'd come to know, like a nurse about to remove a bandage. "Update from the DA's office," she said. "Evan regained full consciousness, and they've interviewed him. He admits his gambling markers, admits he brought oleander into play, but, surprise, tries to dump primary blame on Jenna. Says she masterminded. He was scared of her temper." "She terrified him so much he married her?" I said, the sarcasm coming out before I could leash it. "Exactly," Claire said. "The DA isn't buying the henpecked co-conspirator angle. There's more." I braced without moving. "Tell me." "Evan claims Jenna planned to cut him out too, after you," she said flatly. "He says she'd floated a plan to dose him with the same toxin a few weeks after your heart attack, frame it as stress and grief. He's trying to make himself a potential victim to soften his role as perpetrator." The room spun and reassembled. It wasn't enough to unmother me. She was prepared to widow herself for money. Something old and tender inside me shriveled into ash. I stared at Lila's lemon bowl like it held answers. "Can they prove that?" I asked. "His word alone isn't proof," Claire said. "But the notebook they found in your daughter's apartment has pages labeled 'If A fails' and other options." Some of those options would qualify as attempted harm toward Evan as well. It paints a picture. A picture. The child I'd bandaged through scraped knees and heartbreak had sketched a flow chart of murder. I went very still and discovered stillness can be the opposite of collapse. It can be a kind of standing. The pre-trial hearing was worse than the arraignment because it was longer. We occupied the same cold benches, under the same buzzing fluorescent bars, with the same prosecutors and defenders pacing cracks in the linoleum. The DA laid out the state's readiness. The defense made its early requests, fishing for a technicality to hide behind. I sat between Lila and Claire and learned what it means to be discussed in the third person like an object. The victim this, the intended decedent that. I learned how to refuse eye contact when Jenna tried to siren me with her gaze. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a church lady cardigan touched my sleeve. "I'm sorry, Miss Shaw," she said. "I'm with Victim Services. If you need counseling, support groups, just people who know what it's like to have family become danger, we're here." It sounded like the loneliest club in the world. I took the card anyway. Later I would dial the number. The revelations trickled and then poured. Claire sat me down one Friday in her office. An old Charleston single house turned into law practice, brick fireplace and all, and opened a new file. "Investigators pulled threads," she said gently. 2 years ago, Jenna's mother-in-law fell down a staircase and broke her hip. It was treated as an accident at the time. Now we have statements suggesting Jenna had mopped the landing with something slick and removed the caution sign. The mother-in-law had argued with Jenna earlier that day about money. My stomach tightened. Are they charging that? No. The evidence is suggestive, not conclusive, Claire said. But as character evidence, it's bad, especially paired with a handful of reports from elderly neighbors about cash discrepancies when Jenna offered to grocery shop for them. She paused. "Margaret, the DA is building a pattern. She targets vulnerable people when money's involved." I thought of the girl in the photo with a gap-toothed smile and sandy knees. I thought of the woman who labeled a jar with her own hand. Both were my daughter. Only one had a claim on my love now. Weeks turned into months. The blue shoebox filled and emptied into Lila's fireplace until only ashes remained. I started attending a support group in the basement of a Methodist church, where a dozen of us sat in a circle and learned words for wounds we'd thought were unique. Other people's stories don't fix yours, but they keep it from eating you like an animal in the night. Jenna's lawyer reached out through Claire with the first whisper of a plea. Second-degree attempted murder, 15 years. No parole, Claire summarized, eyes on mine. It spares you a trial and spares her a potential life sentence if a jury decides she's every inch as calculated as the evidence suggests. I swallowed. 15 years is a number you can put on a calendar, and a lifetime is only a phrase. 15 years would take me to 76. Does she admit what she did? I asked. In a plea, she has to allocute, Claire said. Say it out loud, on the record. There is a cruel mercy in written admission. It takes the gaslight out of the room. I told Claire to accept the contours and hammer the nails. The no-contact order folded into the plea, permanent and explicit. Immediate transfer to a facility far from Charleston. No media grandstanding. Claire did what Claire does, turned my wishes into clauses with teeth. At the plea hearing, Jenna looked smaller. Not physically. Something else had shrunk. Arrogance, maybe. Performance. The thing she'd always wielded, a smile that bent light, was gone. She stood, head lowered, and when the judge asked her to state what she'd done, she spoke clearly enough for the court reporter to catch every syllable. I obtained oleander leaves with my husband, Evan Collins, she said. I planned to grind them and put them into food my mother, Margaret Shaw, would eat. I believed it would cause a heart attack and be treated as natural. The words sat in the room like coals in a brazier, glowing, dangerous, undeniable. "Do you enter this plea freely and voluntarily?" Judge Whitaker asked. "Yes," Jenna said, so softly I almost missed it. Before sentencing, the judge asked if the victim wished to address the court. Claire's hand touched my elbow. I stood. My knees remembered church and PTA meetings, and my husband's funeral, and all the previous times I'd stood in rooms to say necessary things. I turned to Jenna because there is no way to say what I needed without looking at the person I needed to hear it. "For 37 years, I said, I loved you the way a mother loves, fierce, protective, sometimes foolish. I protected you from consequences I shouldn't have. I apologized for you when you were wrong. I told myself you'd grow out of it, that stress would sand your sharp edges." I inhaled and found to my surprise that the air wasn't slicing my lungs anymore. "You stood in my kitchen and offered me death when I wouldn't offer you money," I continued. "You wrote a list. You labeled a jar. You did math on my life. Whatever you are now, you are not the girl in those photos on my hallway, and I am done letting that ghost make my decisions." Jenna's eyes filled. She opened her mouth. I lifted my hand in the old habit, the one where every muscle in me rushed to meet her need, didn't fire. "I'm not your shield from the world anymore," I said. "I will not carry your consequences so you can walk light. I request a permanent no-contact order for the duration of your sentence and after. No letters, no calls, not by proxy, not by postcard. I wish you, in the only mercy that is mine to give, the chance to become a person who wouldn't do this again. But you don't get to do it near me." The courtroom went very, very quiet. Judge Whitaker nodded once, an older man recognizing something finished. "So ordered," he said a few minutes later, after he read the sentence. 15 years, no parole, permanent no contact. His gavel sounded like a door locking and a window opening at the same time. They led Jenna away. She didn't call my name. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, reporters tried to turn our pain into content. Claire carved us a path through them with a lawyer's smile that says, "Sue me and see." Lila took my hand like she'd always been there, which in 1,000 small ways she had. "What now?" she asked. "Now I stop bracing for every phone call," I said. "Now I go home without checking the pantry for poison." Home took a different shape. On Claire's advice, and because I couldn't bear to cook again in the scene of my almost death, I sold the cottage to a young couple who loved the marshlight and the kitchen island. I also sold Low Country looms to a national home goods company that had tried to court me for years. They offered more zeros than I needed. I signed, took the money, and with Claire's help, sequestered most of it into vehicles that had nothing to do with Jenna and never would. I bought a smaller place 3 blocks from Lila, white clapboard, blue shutters, a postage stamp yard where I planted basil and zinnias, and nothing with secrets. Lila laughed that first afternoon as we rolled paint on the living room walls, and she wiped a dot of blue from my cheek with her sleeve. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I said, surprised to hear the truth in my voice. Not because I lost my daughter, but because I lost the obligation to pretend she still existed the way I wanted her to. With free time, I did 2 things that felt like opposites, and were actually sisters. I signed up to volunteer at a community center that shelters people escaping abuse, women and men who've learned, the hard way, that love can be a hook if you don't cut the line. And I started a journal, old-fashioned paper and a fountain pen, where I wrote answers to questions I would have preferred not to ask. What did I miss? Where did I collude by smoothing things over? How do I say no without writing a defense brief in the margins? At the center, I listened more than I spoke. You can hear your own story in the cadence of strangers' voices and still let theirs be theirs. A woman in a denim jacket told me about a son who tried to bankrupt her. A man with careful hair told me about a daughter who stole his meds and blamed the neighbor. A teenager with chipped nail polish said, "My mom keeps letting my stepfather back in." And the circle hummed with a kind of grief. That is also love. Back at home, a cardboard box waited in the bottom of my closet. A box of photos I'd pulled from the old cottage. One rainy afternoon, I laid them out on my dining table. Jenna as a baby in a sun hat the size of a satellite dish. Jenna at 7, missing her front teeth, holding a plastic bucket full of Folly Beach shells. Jenna at 19, hugging me after I sewed her a floral duvet for her dorm. "What are you going to do with them?" Lila asked from the doorway, voice soft, as if we were at a museum. "I'll keep these," I said, making a small stack of childhood pictures, the girl who truly was a different person. "The rest can go." We lit the fireplace, even though it was barely cool enough to justify it, and fed the other photos to the flames. It was a ritual and a recognition. You can honor who someone was without making a shrine to who they became. 6 months after the plea, Claire called with a formal tone that told me it wasn't about motions. Department of Corrections informed me Jenna was assaulted by other inmates, she said. Non-fatal. She's in the prison infirmary for a bit. I waited for the pang that used to define me, the reflexive lunge. It didn't come. A softer sadness did, the kind you might feel passing a house you lived in long ago that isn't yours anymore. "Is she asking to see me?" I asked, already knowing the legal answer. "Yes," Claire said, "but the order stands without your consent to lift it. You're under no obligation." "I won't go," I said. "If she has something to say, she can say it to the state." "Good," Claire said quietly. "Good for you." On the 1-year anniversary of the day I chose the police over the lie of family, Lila and I made dinner together. We joked we were reclaiming the kitchen as a holy place. She grilled shrimp. I made a lemony orzo. We opened a bottle of red someone had brought to church potluck and forgotten. We set 2 plates and laughed at how radical it felt for such a simple act not to carry dread. "You know the strangest thought I had today?" I said, twisting my glass by the stem and watching the thick legs slide down the bowl. If Jenna had gotten everything she wanted, if I'd died, if she'd paid the markers, if she'd moved to the tropics, she still wouldn't have had what I have right now. "What's that?" Lila asked. "Peace," I said. "Air in my lungs that isn't waiting to be yanked. A porch I can sit on without glancing over my shoulder. A friend whose smile isn't a transaction." Lila clinked her glass against mine. "To non-transactional smiles," she said, grinning. "To neighbors who turn into sisters." We ate. We talked about everything we'd talk about anyway. Church gossip, the raccoon that kept tipping Lila's trash can, whether Mrs. Pickens at the corner house actually believed her hydrangeas understood English. Ordinary life is the greatest inheritance. Later, I sat at my small desk by the window with my journal and the pen I'd learned to trust as a witness. The street was quiet, humidity hanging like a shawl, a single light glowing in Lila's kitchen across the way, our own Morse code of neighborly comfort. I wrote, 1 year since I chose to live. 1 year since I stopped paying the rent on other people's consequences with my safety and silence. 1 year since I looked at the person I loved most and said no, like a prayer. Jenna tried to buy her future with my body. She failed. What she gave me instead is something she never learned to value, the right to belong to my own life. I am 62 now. When did that happen? And I am not too old to begin again. I closed the journal and put my palm flat over the cover like you might bless a child. Across the street, Lila's kitchen light blinked off. I thought of the support group in the Methodist basement, of the woman in the cardigan pressing a business card into my palm, of Claire standing between me and a world that prefers its women pliable, of Detective Ramirez, steady as a lighthouse. I thought of the box of photos that held both truth and lies, and of the fire that had eaten the ones I no longer needed to carry. I turned out my light and stood for a minute in the dark, listening to the quiet of my small house, not the weaponized quiet that used to sit on my chest like a weight, but the quiet that holds and keeps, the quiet you can sleep inside. Now, I said into the dark, the word small and sufficient, and I slept. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it spoke to you, please support the channel by hitting subscribe and giving this video a like. It truly helps more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from today? Tell me your city and any thoughts you'd like to share. Your voices keep this community strong. Take good care, and I'll see you in the next story.